A University of Pennsylvania professor just demonstrated why we don't need people with his sort of ideology that is so far to the left, it is actually harmful to the people that he is trying to help. And make sure that you guys follow me on Parler, follow me on Rumble, and we're gonna get right into this. And we're gonna get right into what this fool says. It's absolutely ridiculous, and it goes to show that people in higher education, just because you're educated, that doesn't mean you're actually wise, because he said one of the most unwise statements I've heard in a while. We're gonna get into the New York Post article that details what he said. Yes, it was goofy, very, very goofy. So professor gets heat after saying whiter elderly should wait for the vaccine. And understand the larger point that I'm making, regardless of whether or not you think it is safe to take the vaccine now, we're gonna go along with the assumption that it is safe to take the vaccine, just to illustrate this larger point that I'm trying to make, which is that these far left-leaning professors are not helping society. They're making it more silly. And just based on this man's photo, he already looks silly, but we're gonna get into it. Assistant Professor of Medical Ethics and Health Policy, Harold Schmidt, that's his name. And he went on to say some silly things. So, an ethics professor at the University of Pennsylvania sparked a heated debate by suggesting essential workers should get priority for the coronavirus. Okay, many have said that, not just him, and there are good arguments for that part of it. But he went on to say that essential workers should get priority for the coronavirus vaccine over vulnerable senior citizens because the workers are more likely to be minorities. So this guy is such an idiot. He thinks that most essential workers are minorities, or that they're more likely to be minorities, which I have no idea where he's getting that from. The term essential worker wasn't even going around until earlier this year. And there are a lot of different types of essential workers. I don't know where he's getting that from. But he went on to say even more silly things. And Harold Schmidt, that's his name, he went on to say older populations are whiter, according to him. That's what he told the New York Times. And he went on to state that society is structured in a way that enables them to live longer. Instead of giving additional health benefits to those who already had more of them, we can start to level the playing field a bit. This whole leveling of the playing field, restorative justice type of rhetoric, it is a never-ending goalpost that will always be moved. There is no endpoint to it. That is why I'm not in agreement with this sort of thing. But this guy, what he's saying is idiotic because it will eventually cause more harm to minorities. Because guess what? He's saying that we should prioritize essential workers who are minorities, but he's not saying that we should prioritize minorities who are high risk. He's not even making that argument. So according to him, he's suggesting that a person like me should receive a vaccine over someone that is elderly, that is in my own family. So I should get this before my grandma gets it. I should get the vaccine before them. That's what he's suggesting. But his goal is to help minorities. According to him, he's trying to do something to help minorities. But how does it help minorities? By giving me the vaccine, but not the elders who are at higher risk. And it's such an odd thing that he even brought race into the equation when it comes to this sort of thing. It's so weird that they do that sort of thing, because why are you adding a racial component to something that shouldn't even have a racial component? And the article goes on to state that at least 221,000 of those who died from COVID-19 were over 65, or about 80% of total deaths recorded through Wednesday, according to the CDC. Those over the age of 85 are 630 times more likely to die from the virus than those between the ages of 18 to 29. So if you're young, you stand a far greater chance of doing well with the virus compared to the elders. And the CDC director, Robert Redfield, has said he believes priority should be given to people 70 and older who live with children or grandchildren, which that makes sense. That makes sense. And then someone else went on to state that it's fine to call for vaccinating essential and frontline workers first, which I agree with that. That does make sense because they are the ones that are also at a great risk because they're being highly exposed to it. That is what a commentator, Brenda Tippin, said, who identified herself as a biologist. But you had to elaborate and identify the elderly population as being whiter and point to that as assumption that they had more privileged lives, and it's time to level the playing field. Inexcusable. These extremist professors, that what they're saying is actually not being challenged enough, because what they say is absolutely ridiculous, and they are supposed to be the teachers. They are supposed to be the ones informing people, but instead they're putting their own far left ideology onto their students. So now I'm going to play this clip that I want to show you guys of where Ben Shapiro, he goes into the CDC guidelines as far as what some of these people are recommending as far as the social equitable part of administering these vaccines, and it gets even more silly when we take a look at this.
Hey, Noah Smith, who again is no conservative, right? He's a Bloomberg opinion writer of the left. He points out that there were these slides that were put out for possible guidance by the CDC that show essential workers getting this before the elderly. Why? Because essential workers are very likely to be more often Black and Hispanic than the elderly. Now, as we talked about last week, there were actual ethicists, supposed ethicists, who were suggesting just this, that because elderly people tend to be whiter, because white people live longer in the United States than some other subsections of the population, there were too many old white people. So you know what? In the name of equity, let some of the old white people die in the name of younger, not white people. Give the 20-year-old essential worker with no actual vulnerability to this thing the shot before you give an 85-year-old white person that shot. I mean, this is crazy. Okay, and I'll tell you why this is especially crazy. It means that more Black and Hispanic people will die. Right? Think about this.
Bingo. Because when you prioritize race over vulnerability, that is what they are suggesting. That's what they are suggesting. So that means that a young, healthier Black man will be prioritized over an elderly Black man. That is what they're recommending. And that's what happens when you are bringing a racial component into this where it is not necessary.
Statistics here. And there are a lot. It's true that a disproportionate number of people by sort of demographic percentage of the population, it is true. A higher percentage of people over the 85 are white than the percentage of people who are 30 who are white. Okay, that is true in the United States. It also happens to be true that the most vulnerable subset of Black and Hispanic people in the United States are people who are over the age of 85, because Black and Hispanic people respond to the virus in exactly the same way as white people, which is to say, if you're old, you are at serious risk. So, if you take vaccines away from the elderly on the basis of age, and you give it to essential workers on the basis of race, you will end up with more absolute Black and Hispanic deaths in order to achieve less relative Black and Hispanic death. Right? You will end up with more actual dead bodies that are Black and Hispanic because you're not actually prioritizing the elderly. You will end up with a lower percentage of Black and Hispanic deaths because you're prioritizing where more Black and Hispanic people live in the age distribution of the population. Did you understand how idiotic and eugenic this is? I mean, it's social engineering from the top levels. Games of life and death. That is a game of life and death. Because when you say people above the age of 85, those people get it after the essential workers, what you're saying is not just that a 20-year-old Black worker should get it before an 85-year-old white lady. What you're saying is that a 20-year-old Black worker should get it before an 85-year-old Black lady, right? Because now you're elevating race and the age group where race is most proportionate, you are elevating that above where the vulnerability is. And this is what the CDC was recommending. This is what they were recommending in some of their slides. According to Noah Smith, okay, they said that in order to mitigate health inequities, the highest incidence and mortality in congregate living and racial and ethnic minority groups underrepresented among adults over the age of 65. That means that you should actually look to focus your outreach not on the highest incident and mortality in congregate living. You should look instead to prioritize the people who are most Black and Hispanic, namely essential workers. So if you look, it says to mitigate health inequities.
Which I don't know where they're even getting that from. Because essential workers applies to a wide range of positions. So I don't get that.
You should start with essential workers, right? Essential workers should be given top priority because racial and ethnic minority groups are disproportionately represented in many essential industries. A quarter of essential workers live in low-income families. Then you should do adults aged over 65 because racial and ethnic minority groups are underrepresented among adults over age 65. Okay, this is purely them saying, we do not care if Black and Hispanic elderly people die because, you know what, if they die, they're at least dying along with a bunch of white people who are over the age of 85. I mean, that's insane. This is insane. Josh Barrow, again, not a right-winger. He says, this is a real concrete error arising from social justice ideology failing to see individuals rather than groups. In general, I don't think the public health community's forays into politics and ethics have gone well during all this. Yeah, you think? Matt Iglesias, who's been a guest on this program, and was just rational enough to be ousted from his own job over at Vox, which he co-founded. He wrote, basically, if you take 1,000 prime-age Americans, you'd expect to have 150 African-Americans in the pool versus about 100 if you take 1,000 senior citizens. So in that sense, vaccinating essential workers promotes racial equity because you're giving shots to more Black people. But since the infection fatality rate for senior citizens is at least 10 times the rate for non-seniors, you're not actually saving Black people's lives this way. You're opting for a strategy that leads to more Black deaths and more white deaths than the vaccinate seniors first strategy, but you're deciding it's better for equity. This is what ethics requires. He says, I often feel medical ethics people should run their ideas by a normal ethicist because to me that doesn't make a lot of sense. Also, says Matt Iglesias, we know the people who have been dying the most from COVID are Black senior citizens. The decision here is not to prioritize vaccinating them, but to instead vaccinate a different, less vulnerable group of people and then asserts this creates some kind of abstract collective racial benefit. There have been a lot of takes lately about woke liberals prioritizing symbolic racial issues over the concrete needs of non-white people, but this idea really takes the cake. Okay, so even people on the left were like, this is insane.
Yep. So even people on the left are calling this goofy because it is. Because it makes no sense in real life. Because if you are going to prioritize essential workers on the basis of their work being essential, that is one thing. But to suggest that, oh, we're going to prioritize essential workers on the basis of race, and we're going to place more importance on the race over vulnerability, this is when you sound dumb as hell. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section. Hit the like, share, subscribe button, and blessings to you.